This is a recording of the KC Secular AA speaker meeting held every Saturday night at 7 o'clock p.m. at HJ's Youth and Community Center, 6425 Warnell Road, Kansas City, Missouri. This is episode 14, and our speaker is Greg H.
Welcome to the Secular Speaker Meeting. I'm Simon. I'm an alcoholic. Our secular group attempts to maintain a tradition of free expression and to conduct a meeting where all may feel free to express any doubts or disbeliefs that they may have and to share their own personal form of spiritual experience, their search for it, or the rejection of it. In keeping with AA tradition, we do not endorse or oppose any form of religion or atheism. Our only wish is to help those who want recovery without having to accept anyone else's beliefs or having to deny their own. You know what, actually... So I'm just going to skip all this business today. I started 5 minutes late. Yeah, everybody knows how this works. That's here, I'm pretty sure. Is there anybody celebrating or any extended periods of sobriety that they would like to?
3 years.
Yeah. I don't have a coin.
I have it. I got it this morning, this afternoon.
Right?
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
If you'd like to listen to the past podcasts, they're available on secularaaspeaker.org, or I think you can look up Kansas City Secular AA Speaker Meeting on any of the podcast jobs you listen to podcasts on. Tonight our speaker is Greg, and I'll let you do your thing.
All right. I'm Greg, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Greg.
I'm very glad to be here. A little nervous about speaking, but I want to keep it on track, which is so not me. Before drinking, during drinking, and now, right? Okay. Well, there's a couple of episodes of alcoholic drinking, and the first one was as a youngster, and while I was in high school, I really fell in love with how drinking not just made me feel, but took away how I felt. I was a little guy growing up, and quiet, but in a very, not boisterous, but great communicators, mostly Italian and Portuguese in my neighborhood. I remember when I was little and I first realized it, I thought they were fighting and they scared me. Joe and Eleanor, who were really like the house mother and father of the neighborhood and looked after all of us growing up. But my mom says, no, people from different backgrounds can speak different ways, but they really love each other and watch. Now in my mind, I see Joe leaning back in his chair with a glass of vino, just laughing to the heavens. I keep that with me because he's very important to me. But a key part, too, is when I was started school, I had a heck of a time reading. And, of course, we didn't have things like dyslexia or learning disabilities back then. First it was, he must need glasses and he's just not paying attention. But there was a very, very strong block between what went in and what came out. I just couldn't quite get it out if I was reading out loud. It was a terror of my life. Luckily, my mom and my dad were a great help and really went to work working with me on it. And phonics was the big thing. We did phonics every day. I'm a child of Dr. Spock, if you can't tell, but if I seem odd, you can blame it on him. She was really into reading and pulling things together, and so she helped me. My dad taught me some tricks that I'm very grateful for. So while I couldn't read, his family and he was very concerned about proper English. And while he would never chastise me if I said the wrong words, he would just say them in the right way. No anger, no shame, and over a number of years of that, I really learned to at least understand when I heard it what decent English was. And I may not know what a participle is, but I could sure as hell tell when one's dangling. It just it just rings. So I learned how to cover later on when I realized I was gay, which is a funny story. I learned how to cover that too. A lot of shame going on. And there were some intrigues and problems in my family that I didn't understand at the time, but kept me walking on eggs as well. So there was really no relief from this. It later became existential angst, this almost always anxiety of looking in other people's eyes to see if you're doing it right, which was a skill that I carried into drinking, certainly, but I didn't care. So I grew up with that, and when I got into high school, I started drinking in earnest. And I remember when I first drank, my cousins were visiting me. They were both in the Army, and we went to a party, and I remember going there with them, but I don't remember getting home. And I know it felt wonderful, though, and I kept it up through the early part of college. And when I first got into college, there was a group of us outsiders, so to speak, who was a wonderful, interesting group of young people and very colorful. And we all had a nickname, and they christened me with Keeper of the Keys, which was Keeper of the Keys to the wine cellar. Because I was drinking pretty good back then, too. And that continued. And then also, in those hippy-dippy days, drugs were a big part of it. And my only drugs that I really got, I wouldn't even say hooked on, but very, I ran around with a lot, was barbiturates. And of course, then barbiturates and alcohol are not a good combination. And ultimately, I'd gone in, I was in the reserves to keep me out of the draft. I was just going to be drafted. And when I got out, I went down to San Luis Obispo. I did a lot of work with horses and animals. My mom was really big. She was a farm girl, and teaching me empathy for animals. And she let me have whatever animals I wanted, from salamanders and snakes to even caught a baby possum and dogs, of course. And she was always good with me and animals and how to feel for an animal. And, you know, they're an animal. You can't expect them to be a person in how they think. And I had horses and worked a lot with horses through my younger years. So, those were good things for me. I feel really, really lucky. But I went down to San Luis Obispo and I met a whole bunch of new people. That's where I went to school. Ultimately got my master's there. And, the barbiturates and the alcohol caught up with me, and I ended up in the hospital. I don't remember going, but I remember waking up in a room with only a little window and walls and a mattress on the floor. Did I really die? And is this what happens? Is this hell? But it turns out I was, again, very fortunate in the people in my life. This is a theme. I've been so lucky with the people in my life. And the therapist there, Luigi Romano, was quite a skillful man. And I did group therapy there. And while I went every day for a year and 3/4. There was a year and a quarter. There were no alcohol and drug programs. There was AA, no NA, but they didn't want anyone who also used drugs. That was a definite no. So I could go to the Alana Club, but that would be the only thing that I could do. So I was pretty much not welcome, which fit me to a T. But I stayed sober. And during that period, I met my wife. We had children. I met my best friend, still to this day, of 50 years, who I just got back from seeing in Panama. And he and I went through life together. We went to school together. We had our careers together. We were just kind of joined at the hip and still are spiritually. So he was a great, great gift. So I'm very cognizant of the fact that in spite of my little introverted self, I've had wonderful people that seem to want me in their lives as well, and they certainly gave me some lessons. I stayed sober. I had some interesting people I consider mentors and friends. At that time, I met an old lady who I had no idea who she was, and later found out she was fairly famous in this world. And she lived in a hotel, and I was introduced by a friend. I did music, and my friends played guitar. He says, "You got to meet this person who was the who was the aunt of his ex-girlfriend." And so took me over. Well, my dad grew up Christian Science. She was Christian Scientist. My grandfather used to study with the New Thought people who were very big back in those days, and she did too. So we instantly had and she was alcoholic, and I was alcoholic. And then we had our first child, and of course, and she always referred to me as herself as me as her grandson, and I don't know why. But it got me in some doors, I can tell you that. We even she used to live at Hearst Castle. We even got a free private tour of Hearst Castle one day. She arranged that. So she was, I want to give you two pieces of advice she gave me. I asked her, why does she live in hotels? And she says, well, I learned a long time ago that the secret to my happiness is to live small and elegantly. And I don't mean diamonds and jewels, which she was not. Like an elegant theory, perfectly tailored to what I need in my life. And so she lived small, but a beautiful life. She didn't have to do what she didn't want to do. Everything was basically the way she liked it. And I kept that. We live in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath bungalow, which is the best little place in the best little place in the world. I just love this house, but it's not big. It's reasonably cute inside, just like us. The other thing, one of our visitors who was rather, this particular woman was rather shallow and full of herself. And my friend was 80, and she had this beautiful face full of wrinkles, just very wrinkly face. And the woman says, well, why don't you get a facelift? Everybody's doing it now. Well, of course, those were the early days of facelifts, or at least publicly announced facelifts. She looked at her and says, why would I want to do that? I've earned every one of these wrinkles, and you would have me wipe them out. Be very comfortable and appreciative of who you are and how you look. It's really not the deal. It might for the first 15 minutes impress people, but after that, you're on your own. And she was definitely a beautiful person. So she was a key early mentor of mine as well. So I went on drug and alcohol free for 4 years, after which I had a brief period of time. I had been working in a methadone clinic, and the funding was pulled from it in Bakersfield. We had 101 slots. This wasn't even touching the addict population there, but they pulled the funding. And so I started drinking again. I found myself, I heard somebody say this just recently, I found myself going to the lettuce aisle by way of the wine bottle so I could look at the artwork. What we don't tell ourselves. I still like art, but I never did really like wine. But that was a short stint. I moved back to San Luis Obispo and got a job in an alcohol and drug program, which they had started since I was there as an inpatient. And went on for 27 years and developed a career by education and all my basics of life during that 27 years. And it was 3 years I've been sober, so it would be 16 years ago now. we have a timeshare in New Orleans. It's kind of our second, or at least our getaway, and we love it very much. And for some reason, and we often go, if not most of the time, to Southern Decadence, which is a gay, raucous time. And I decided, for some reason, I got in my head this time, 27 years, I want to party with the big boys. Problem being, I never was a big boy, so by the time we came home, I was pretty much hooked. And I had a private practice by then in counseling and consulting. And I started drinking in September. And by June, I had to pass my practice on to somebody else, who I was mentoring and ready to take full time. Because I couldn't be on call 24/7 and know that I wasn't going to be drunk. Luckily, nothing did happen, but if it did, it was very touchy ground. So I did turn it over to him, and got my old job back with the state, which I'd had years and years ago when I first got to Missouri in '79, and that allowed me to get off at 4:30 to come home and drink. And that lasted for quite some time. But then we had a very, very traumatic time, a series of them. And this resulted in serious trauma for me. I had already been traumatized in 2003, April 21st. I was in an explosion, which resulted in 9 surgeries over 5 years. So it was a significant thing for me, and I still have the tinnitus. I thought when your ears ring, they really rung. I got a head full of cicadas up there, and they're not fun. But also I had acute stress for sure, but long-standing even to this day. Certain things trigger me, and I hear it going off. And but that was the one traumatic thing. And then my daughter, who had lost a baby the year before, to a miscarriage, which was very hard, finally made a second pregnancy and carried it to term, and we were all just thrilled and waiting to hear. And she went into labor, and we got a call from David, her husband, and it was unimaginable that she had died. She had an aneurysm, where the fluid. Oh man, it's great to be 70. Amniotic fluid gets in the blood and it clots. And so she had a stroke right there, and they had to take her. My granddaughter lived. Touch and go there a little bit in the beginning, but she's done very, very well now. And my son-in-law is just the greatest. So that was real hard. And then 10 months later, I believe, we get a call from my mom's partner of 11 years. At that point, they were both 91, that they couldn't find her. And this is so unusual, because they were together 4 days a week and took 3 days by themselves, which is a great arrangement, don't you think? And during those 3 days, they would have cocktails. It used to be 5:30 and went down to 4, and talk and have a couple of drinks. And that's all I think she ever drank, except a couple of times she got drunk with me. And those are memorable. But they couldn't find her. And then I got a plane ticket, and I was off in the morning, and my son called me, and they found her upside down in a garbage can and brutally killed. And it murdered, yes. And if you can say luckily, when Les couldn't get a hold of my mom, he called me, but he also called his kids who live not far. And they came over, and his kids are my age. They came over, and they were looking for Mom. And Eric came home with the baby, who was 2 at that time. And he said, "Come on, let's go up and find Grandma." And they attacked him from the upstairs. The overall plan was terrible, but there was a brutal murder arranged for months and months and months. They had found a house they were planning it in and a computer with everything on it. And it's just unimaginable. So then we went out for a year and a half for that. I was really drinking by then, from New Orleans till then. I was already drinking. But that was it, wasn't it? I just really went over the edge at that point. Constant vodka. Vodka was my friend. Not his, my friend. Without Ty, I'm telling you, he kept me going. He threw a lot at that point. We had to settle everything and come back home. And then we just got home, and then I had to go to trial and be the face of the family for their murder, the mom and the daughter. It was my son's ex-wife, his mother, and then the father. And they were all involved in this. And his ex-wife was narcissistic personality disorder of the worst kind. It's Trump on steroids, and she was a piece of work. I knew she was from the time being in the business. I had seen a few. And so when she lost the baby, because, she would make accusations, she would go to court, she would be crazy, and then she would be crazy again, and crazy again, and ultimately he got 100% custody. They decided to hatch this plan and run off with the baby, but make it look like he did it. So it was a brutal time. I was in court for 3 months, exactly 3 months, as the face of the family, which was both horrifying because they had so much evidence all around the room they put them on these presentation boards. So much demonstrations. They tasered her with 2 tasers and hot-shotted her with the other thing and strangled her to death. And they had 2 guns, and you couldn't write this stuff. And it was all around. And they had crazy attorneys. One thought she was Columbo, and the other one was just real noisy and tried to make loud right, which it wasn't. Ultimately, they were both convicted of first degree and many other crimes. But that whole thing was very traumatic. But out of that, I learned a lesson, and I would like to share that lesson. Though I was drinking, I was partying. I'd go be in court, and I'd go out in a lovely area in the middle of Oakland by Lake Merritt, and I would walk over there, and I would have a good time, bar to bar to bar, and come home blitzed, and then be up and ready for court the next morning, Visine, and away I went. And but in that time, I had learned another thing, that for everything as bad as it might be, you need to have something that good in order to offset it. Otherwise, you just have the memory of the bad. 3 months of that would have been really crazy making. It was anyway. So I made a point of, though alcohol was involved, of finding things like once-in-a-lifetime things. And I had some of the best times of my life while I was out there. And met some wonderful people, one of which, I got a degree in art, and I love art. And they had the Stein, the whole family, they had 3 museums right within, the MoMA and the Jewish Museum and another one over there. And they had all about Gertrude Stein and her family. And if I would have never forgiven myself if I didn't go. Well, I did go on the off day. But I was troubled by, how do these lawyers, I thought everybody had to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing. I really did. I didn't know the lawyers didn't have to. And so I had just been real troubled by this. Thank God we had a wonderful judge, and I'd always stay after to listen to the back and forth, which was an education. But he also was the judge for elder abuse. How nice was that, huh? And so he didn't put up with any garbage. But I was sitting at the bar in a nice little place right there in between all three museums. And this, the people involved in the murder were Chinese. And this Chinese, person came up and sat next to me. And I guess I looked kind of lawyerly in the right light. And she said, "Why are you from here?" I said, "No, I'm out for a trial." She said, "Oh, are you an attorney?" I said, No. I said, "My mother was." Well, there was a lot of publicity about all this. And she knew of what I was speaking in. And, she took me to law school. I was saying, "I don't know how they do this and get away with it." And she smiled and she says, "Well, I'm a defense attorney. In civil cases, I can't have anybody's life in my hands, but I can have their money in my hands." And we had a whole good time, and she explained the whole thing to me. So I was no longer troubled. I didn't like it. I didn't like it per se, but I understood it. And how people drop in your life like that at just the right time. Plus, being Chinese, her husband was from Mexico, Missouri. Now, this was in the Bay Area. And so she was telling me about when the first time she went home to Mexico, Missouri, and she saw a black girl walking down the street, and she said, "Oh, thank God, there's another one of us here." And so we had a wonderful time. I'll never see her again, and I'll never forget her for what she did for me. So, the drinking continued, and I went into treatment, I hit third stage very quickly, and physical addiction. They say that when you stop and you start again, you will be just about where you would have been had you never stopped. And boy, I went right through I stopped at stage 2 back then, trouble in my life. But, boy, I hit stage 3 rather quickly, where my withdrawals were a little painful and dangerous. So, a number of times I went in the hospital, and luckily they started our group, our wonderful group. And, I'd been going to the gay group, which was good, but it was peppered with, philosophy, religion, that I found myself wanting to lie rather than tell the truth, which seemed to be antithetical to what we're doing. And, then I met in treatment, in the hospital, in the intensive outpatient, I met one of us, and he told me about it, and I was the 5th person in, I believe, into our group. And I came in, and I really enjoyed everything, and I went out. Drank some more. Came back in, I went out. Went to the hospital, came back, I went out. Finally, 3 years ago, it took. And this is what it was. Tie us here. As you know, we deal with a lot of illness in our lives, and it's scary a lot of times. Luckily, everything's pretty stable right now. So I'd been sober, and Ty went in the hospital. So we had a dog who had just gotten terribly sick. So I'd come home to every hole in her body was oozing out all over the floors. I have a picture of all the rugs I brought to him to show. And he was in a hospital, and damn if I didn't start drinking. And I was going to stop. I wasn't going to show anybody. No one's going to know. It's just, my little time. And of course, I couldn't stop. And I was so ashamed of myself, which is one of the themes we pick up very easily. I had enough shame being this kid with learning disabilities and then faking the reading. Had enough shame being gay, and back in those days, they would round up the gay people in San Francisco, and they would print their names in the paper, and they would print their jobs in the paper, and it was just a losing game all the way around if you got caught. So I was never going to go there. No one was ever going to know about it. But I found out when I was 10, and my grandfather lived in Hollywood, and his wife, and she was kind of in these circles, and played piano at the Hollywood Bowl, and so she got tickets to the Hollywood parade of stars they have every year in Hollywood Christmas parade. And there's a big party, and all these stars were there, and us. And I don't know if you remember Ed Wynn, but he was such a kind man, and he asked my mom if he could take me around, and he would introduce me to his friends. I was 10 years old. What a deal. And TV was very big in everybody's lives back then. Cowboy stars were there, and TV stars and other people were there. I didn't even know. And then Sabu the Wonder Boy, who was the original Mowgli in the Jungle Book, came by. Remember that first time you were breathless when you saw somebody and you didn't know what it was? I was stopped dead in my tracks. I knew from that moment on. I still have a headshot from Hollywood of him that I found. So I knew all this, but I was never going to tell anybody. After, I know I'm losing the point, huh? After, I wanted to say, before I started drinking again, I met my first partner who was dying at the time, and I had never been with a man up until that time. So it was like we had this time together, which was wonderful, and, we had death overhead and birth right here. And I also had a wonderful mentor named Peter who took me by the hand and walked me through coming out, and was a great gift. I was taking AIDS training. I worked a lot with AIDS, so death and dying was the deal. It was the whole core of what I did. So those themes of death and dying were existential themes, were very big. And he'd given a talk, and he came up and sat next to me first, and he was a cute little guy in this raggedy hat. And then he got up and he spoke like no one I'd ever hear speak, largely Buddhist. And later he told me he was a New York intellectual atheist Jew who is now a Buddhist. And I was able to, we met every week and had long talks and went to lunch together, and he was quite worldly and knowledgeable of everything from food to opera. And so we went to the opera every opening night. We went to the opera. And it was a great, great, great friendship, important for me. And at the time I met Barry as well. And so, he and Barry, being both suffering from the same disease, could share this stuff in a way that I couldn't even enter the conversation. And so I loved listening to them talk. And within a short time, first Barry died, and then Peter died not long afterwards. So I was dealing with all that, and wasn't drinking. A couple of things out of all of this, so there's some great gifts that come. And one of them was I was able to take Peter to his last flow show at the Cabaret, which was Sunday night, the best show in town, Sunday nights, raising money for Amphar. As long as if he told me he had to go, I would help him leave. We would go. Well, he never wanted to go. And I think he knew it was his last time, and he was really happy to go and experience it all. And then I had another friend who was a young man who had gone to school with my son and daughter-in-law. They were all in art school. And he was just a real character, and he was quite sick. He was living with his grandmother and father because his parents didn't want anything to do with it. And so I asked if he wanted what he would like to do, and he'd like to go to his favorite bars again. Gay bars are like churches. They're where we go to celebrate, It's where family is formed. So it's a little different than just going to bars. There's a whole different feeling about meeting people in a place that's safe, or safer than, especially years ago, where life wasn't all that safe. And so I took him. We went to several of his favorite bars, and then his last favorite bar, which was actually the lesbian bar, Tootsie's at the time. It's no longer here, but he had the best time. And I feel very, very grateful that I got to be with both of them at a really important time in their life. Not a big deal, but given the circumstances, it was a big deal. And be a part of that. So I'm very grateful for that. So, I'm sorry I'm rambling. I'll bring it together. So since then, I shamed myself into staying sober, and I haven't drank since then, and I continued in the group, and the group was very important to me, this particular group, because there's no shame in our group. Have you noticed that? No people shaking their fingers at you and telling you what you should do and read this page and that page and get on your knees and all that stuff. That was not my cup of tea. And that's just not there. We have wonderful, very bright, deep-feeling people, all different, but all kind of very much the same, philosophical in many ways. So our discussions are always on track and meaningful, and our time together, I feel like, is family. And I remember when you first came in, I was really pleased to see you. I wasn't quite sure, really, but I was glad when you told everyone. But it's just been such a gift, and it's really more than keeping me sober. It's given me, I've come back to life again. I have meaningful discussions after 13 years of laying there in La La Land, such as it was. And I was intellectually dead, and I've always been a pretty philosophical guy, and you know, gone all the way through school to the end. And in spite of my reading problems, I learned how to skim. And when I first started my doctorate, they gave us a class called Reading for Research. My folks made sure I took the Evelyn Wood reading dynamics. It's all about skimming. My dad taught me how to read tests. You start at the end, find the question, then you read all the bullshit about how you get to the answer. But you've already got the answer in your mind. You know, they taught me things, tools that got me through. And I was really a very good writer. I almost said brilliant, but how silly was that? In my own mind. But I could write. And so that was my gift. So they taught us reading for research. They brought in books and taught us how to skim, how to get to the point, and then go past the rest. I felt legitimate for the first time in my life. I didn't have a secret. I was reading. So anyway, I'm gonna pull it together right now and just say thank you all. And I'm so glad you started this group. It's hard to talk on the street corner, and this gives me an opportunity. But I am very, very grateful to be here and to be in our groups with all of us. I just really, really love it and love you guys. And that's that. I will pass.
Thanks.
Thank you, Greg. You mentioned you had a lot of people in your life that were not judgmental growing up, and I guess encouraged you to, I don't know, be better. But I assure you, you are that for a lot of other people now.
Wow.
I remember first walking into the meetings, and you're a very welcoming face to see when people come in. I always appreciate that.
Well, I've enjoyed watching you grow too. It's really a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a journey. I'm going to pass the mic around, and anybody who wants to comment on what you've heard, or if you've got something else you need to get off your chest or like to talk about, now's the time. I'm going to start with you, Ty. You're more than welcome to. You
must all know this is the love of my life and my husband, so And really, he saved me too. He's a great, great mentor and friend, and the most graceful man I've ever known. We all have gifts, and his is the gift of grace. Never once did he raise his finger at me. Never once did he yell at me in all that time. And I know I was a handful many times, thinking I was not. And he's just kept his cool. He helped me get through all of that stuff. And what a gift to me. What a gift to me. So anyway, you're on, kiddo.
But I'm just glad that we're in his third year now. I'm really glad about that. All the problems that we've had and the journey that we had to go on to get things done when his mother was murdered and getting her house and everything together and having all those garage sales and all the painting and oh my Lord. But we made it through and packed up the truck and headed back home. So I was really thankful for that, but I'm really thankful for 3 years. That's all I want to say.
Thanks, Di.
Hi, I'm John, and Greg, I just really appreciate hearing your story. I heard a lot of things I hadn't heard before, even though you're a big contributor to our meetings, and it's been really great to find the group and meet you particularly. I really have admired your serenity and appreciate
I still know how to fake it, don't I?
Appreciate the time or two you have helped me outside of the meetings, and look forward to many more of them with you.
Right. Thank you.
I'm Kana, and I'm an alcoholic. I want to thank you for coming and sharing your story today. It's really nice for you to do that. And you always are. Well, I don't know about always, but whenever you're there, you're always almost always the first person to talk. Like it'll be just quiet, and then you're the one who gets the meeting
stand
going.
in silence.
Yeah. And so I think you definitely contribute that for sure to get the meeting. And I know. People are always very glad to see there, and I'm always glad. I remember once you told me when I first started going that like you were glad to see me whenever I was there, and that meant a lot to me. So that'll pass.
I still am.
I'm Emily. I'm an alcoholic.
I am Emily.
I think I guess I started coming to We Agnostics. It'll almost be a year ago, and I really, despite people saying their names every night, it took me a while to learn people's names, but you registered with me as a very loving person immediately because I didn't know his name either at the time. You always sat next to Richard and you always made sure he was okay.
Yeah.
So I'm very glad that you're in recovery and that you're here. So I'll pass.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ginny. I'm an alcoholic.
Ginny.
I am so happy to hear all your story, all just from the beginning to the end. I heard bits and pieces of it, and I just love you so much. I love being around you. I find you to be one of the most you listen. I watch you when everybody's talking in the meetings, and you listen to everybody and every word they say. And it really, means so much. And I want to say that I think you're one of the most optimistic people I've ever known. And what a great, mentor or, example that is to the rest of us, because it is easy to get stuck, so you are, and, you're just an optimistic guy. And one of my two favorite sons is named Greg.
I knew you had good taste.
I have never met a Greg I did not love. So thank you so much. It's just a real gift to be with you.
I feel the same.
Thanks.
I feel the same.
Greg, thank you for sharing that amazing story. It's kind of speechless. It was something and kind of a gift. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Maury.
Thanks. I'm Cass, I'm alcoholic.
Yes.
Yeah, I've never heard a lot of the things that you said tonight for sure, and I had no idea some of all the things that you've gone through. I'm really happy to have you as part of this family, and I do really feel like I feel more at home in this group, and I forget the name of it right now, but the other group, Free Thinkers, which I haven't been going to as often.
You're too young for this. I'm used to it. I just pray for good lighting.
But yeah, I feel more at home in those groups than I have in any other AA group, or really, I think any like therapeutic group or friend group that I've had. You know, I can share more freely than I can in a lot of other places. And when you referred to me at the beginning when I started to come to these, and I wasn't sharing everything about myself, even though I had been out for so long as trans, but I hadn't been speaking about it when I first moved here because I was uncomfortable. I just felt so welcomed at this group from you and from Carmen, especially her. You know, there's so much energy in these people that come that it just feels good, you know, and I'm grateful that you have 3 years and that you have us to support you through things and that you're here to support us. And it's just an awesome thing. So I'll pass.
Thank you, Cass.
Hi, I'm Mark. I'm an alcoholic.
I'm Mark.
Greg, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been a real privilege just getting to know you over these past few months. I really appreciate the positive energy you bring to this group. It's a real special thing. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I've always felt a closeness to you, Greg. And when I first met you this time around, I appreciated this parallel piece of tenacity that I think we both have. And I think you had maybe 6 months and of this shared journey, and I've just loved to watch you grow, you know, and have this time. I felt, you know, when I saw you at Costco and I was buying, you know, these Costco-sized containers of liquor, I was so ashamed, you know, afterwards, and I was just, you know, I just thought, gosh, what am I doing? Anyway, luckily I took all that back, and but I was just on one of my binges, so I'm so appreciative of you. You were just kind of like, oh well, this is Susan. You know, I was just tied, and I didn't feel this judgment, you know. And normally people would be like, oh, don't meet my spouse, you know. This is the person I don't want you to know. Anyway. And thank goodness you weren't that way. And but the two things that you talk about kind of, and I'm paraphrasing, living simply and being who you are. You know, these are things that I come from kind of that Italian intense background, and we express ourselves in kind of intense, loud, prolific way. I don't know how to say it, but my family, they do a lot of screaming, and it's a way of expressing love, which is very backward. It's been very difficult for me to understand, but it's very endearing in a weird way. I love them, and it's very, very confusing to understand. So I appreciate some of the ways of hearing, the ways that you figure some of this stuff out. And the biggest thing that I've heard in what you shared is your resilience and your ability to get back up. You know, and I appreciate that the most. I see that right now in kind of myself, because this has been really tough for me this year. And I really like what you had to say about going through one of the hardest times, but yet being able to see the light, seeing a grace. And that's just beautiful. I mean, that's really, really beautiful. Because I knew a little bit of that story, but I didn't know that piece, and that's really, really a thing that we do have choice of, in our lives. When at this, time, I feel very little choice in some of the things of my life, but this is the thing we have choice. I have choice on. It's the way I see things, And so, thank you for reminding me of that. No matter how dark things are, we always have choices on how we view things. So, thank you. And thank you so much for sharing. This is very, very painful and hard stuff. And every time, you share it, it's got to be, horrific. So, and it's so good to see you, Ty. And I know, this has been a tough winter for all of us. I'm kind of rambling, but I'll stop now. So, happy 3 years, and
thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Lee. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Lee.
Where do I start? I think I'll start by saying that it is refreshing and important and supportive to hear another mental health professional deal with their story of both the addiction, the consequences of the addiction, how the addiction affected their professional life, and then how recovery enhanced it.
Yeah.
Because I think if we're fortunate enough to survive and to move in recovery, it does make us better clinicians. I really,
it produces.
I truly believe that, even though I've never said that publicly.
Yeah.
Another thing that I really appreciate you sharing is the history of how addiction and AIDS and the gay community and the bars all came together in a very, very unique kind of way. That if one had not been around and lived through that period, could never appreciate how important those places were so often for safety, companionship, and affirmation. And I think that you have shared that by talking about the progression of time during those very, very dark years.
Yeah.
And to be really honest with you, I think sometimes that drugs and alcohol kept us being caregivers when otherwise we wouldn't have been able to be the caregivers that were needed. Yeah. And I don't think that's often spoken of.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lee.
Thank you, Lee. Appreciate it.
Did you have anything else that you wanted to touch on?
Just on what she was saying, that one of those things I realized and I hold on to was, and what I learned through much of the dance I've done, is that out of the tragedy, the thing that's I try to keep with me is a level of empathy I wouldn't have had without it. Out of all the death and all the twists and turns around it, I have touched places of empathy within myself that I really appreciate that I probably wouldn't have had. And I'm grateful for the people, and I'm grateful for my experiences with it.
All right. Thank you very much, Greg.
Appreciate it.
I'll set the basket out by the coffee. You can put it right there.